This is a show with no particular niche, baby. It's always about hanging out. Maybe we'll laugh at some stuff, maybe we'll learn something new, but it's always about hanging out, me and you. Hi, hello, and welcome to That Thing with James, a podcast about nothing in particular. I'm your host, James. Now, this is a bi-weekly podcast. However, it's been a couple weeks. I missed the bye, and now I'm in the try in terms of episodes released. And that is because, once again, I was attending to some important, urgent family matters. However, those are done now. Thank goodness. And of course, I feel under the weather. I'm sure it is what's the word I'm looking for? A combination of fatigue, exhaustion, and allergies. I don't feel super hot. I don't feel super great right now. I don't feel particularly warm either. I do feel a little bit warm. I don't feel great. I feel under the weather, even though the sun is bright, and I'm sick of it. It's making me ill. The heat and the sunlight is making me nauseous a little bit. So if I don't have my usual bombastic, entertaining energy, that's why. I'm kind of worn out. But here we are. I'm doing this. I may release another episode next week to make up for the week I missed. Regardless, we are going to get into a very fun topic today. Are you familiar with gnomes, particularly garden gnomes? Yeah, little guys with the beard and the red pointy hats. Yeah, those are a symbol of a bygone era, an era in which people kept hermits as lawn ornaments. Yes, living human hermits as lawn ornaments. This happened. It's a part of history, and we're going to talk about it today. But first, some quick business. If you like this show and you want more of it, you can get over 100 bonus episodes at patreon.com/thatthingwithjames. Yes, patreon.com/thatthingwithjames. You can get access to all that stuff and various perks with the different tiers. Show your support. If you want to help support an independent artiste, an independent creator, and get something in return, then become a patron today at patreon.com/thatthingwithjames. And to those of you who are already patrons, thank you for your patronage. You rock. As for my show email, subreddit, and socials, you can find those handles and addresses written in the episode description, along with the Patreon link. Yes, in the episode description. And if you're watching this on video, those things should be appearing on the Chiron at the bottom of the screen. And for those of you listening, if you didn't know, this show is on YouTube. You can find my channel. Just go on YouTube and search That Thing with James. Yes, That Thing with James. I'm James, and this is my thing. That Thing with James, and you'll see my channel, and you'll subscribe, and you'll love each and every item I have on that channel. Now, without further ado, I've got a few resources pulled up. And as per usual, I did not write a script. Hell, I only skimmed maybe a single page, like the first and last page of these websites I found about this topic, but it's a topic I've known about for some time. How I found out about it, I have no clue. I don't know where I know these things. Sometimes I just know stuff. I have a knowing, and I never know why I know what I know. So, let me take a sip of water, and we will dive into hermits as living lawn ornaments. Just a second. Okay, my babies, let's get into it. Maybe the best place to start is on Wikipedia. I won't read the whole thing, not the history, because I'll leave that to the other two articles I have pulled up, but this should give you a general overview. Yes, garden gnomes. I used to have a gnome. It took a suicide leap off the top of my dresser and shattered into several pieces once when I was in college. That was the last garden gnome I had. I like garden gnomes. I don't know what about it. I've always liked them. It's a fun, kitschy thing to have. And then later I would learn that they were a symbol of a bygone living relic known as the garden hermit. Yes, garden hermits, or ornamental hermits, were people encouraged to live alone in purpose-built hermitages, follies, grottos, or rockeries on the estates of wealthy landowners, primarily during the 18th century. Such hermits would be encouraged to remain permanently on site, where they could be fed, cared for, and consulted for advice or viewed as entertainment. Yes, you're visiting? Come, look at my ornamental hermit. Come, feed him, feed my lawn hermit. Concept. Even in the 18th and 19th centuries, garden hermits were novelties and eccentricities. Grottos had become more popular during the 18th century as places to withdraw for meditation, relaxation, and reflection. With an increased focus on industrialism and production, contemplative garden meditation was viewed by some as an extravagance. With the lack of personal free time in combination with an increase in disposable income, the popularity of quote-unquote natural garden landscaping and the rise of neoclassical culture established an environment in which the idea of garden hermits as novelty guests became popular. In some early instances, hermits were simply represented or hinted at rather than personified. Outside a folly or grotto, a small table and chair, reading glasses, and a classical text might be placed, suggesting that it was where a hermit lived. So some people did not have a hermit, but they created a place where a hermit might live. So you have the idea, oh yes, I like this. This is like we're getting away from all this civilization, going back to a simpler time where we communed and connected more with nature and lived as hermit people, reading books on chairs and tables in the woods by the grotto, in the rockery, near the shrubbery. Later, suggestions of hermits were replaced with actual hermits, men hired for the sole purpose of inhabiting a small structure and functioning as any other garden ornament. Hermits would sometimes be asked to make themselves available to guests, answering questions and providing counsel. In some cases, the hermits would not communicate with visitors, functioning instead like a perpetual stage play or live diorama. In return for their services in residence, hermits would generally receive a stipend in addition to room and board. Okay, so let's go over to this article I found on Atlas Obscura, title, Before the Garden Gnome, the Ornamental Hermit, a real person paid to dress like a druid, written by Allison Meyer, published March 18, 2014. Yes, let me scratch my ear. Okay, here we go. While some gardeners might now throw in a gnome statue among their flowers and shrubberies, back in the 18th century, wealthy estate owners were hiring real people to dress as druids, grow their hair long, and not wash for years. These hired hermits would lodge in shacks, caves, and other hermitages constructed in a rustic manner in rambling gardens. It was a practice mostly found in England, although it made it up to Scotland and over to Ireland as well. Gordon Campbell, a professor of Renaissance studies at the University of Leicester, I think that's how you pronounce it, Leicester, Leicester, recently published The Hermit in the Garden from Imperial Rome to Ornamental Gnome. Imperial Rome? Were there, was that when like hermits became a thing, was in Imperial Rome? With Oxford University Press. It's the first book to delve into the history of the ornamental hermit in Georgian England. As Campbell explains in this video for the book, I've not watched this video, recruiting a hermit wasn't always easy. Sometimes they were agricultural workers. Oh, so you just hired a random farmer to play hermit on your yard? Okay. Sometimes they were agricultural workers and they were dressed in a costume, often in a druid's costume. There was no agreement on how druids dressed, but in some cases they wore what we would call a dunce's cap. It, beckoning to the garden gnome, the pointy cap. It's a most peculiar phenomenon, and understanding it is one of the reasons why I have written this book, unquote. How the live-in hermit came to be a fashionable touch to a splendid garden goes back to the Roman Emperor Hadrian with his villa at Tivoli, which included a small lake with a structure in it built for one person to retreat. When the ruins of this early hermitage were unearthed in the 16th century, it was suggested that Pope Pius IV build one for himself, which he did at the Casina Pio IV. Yet, from here, it gradually verged away from religious devotees isolating themselves for spiritual reflection to hermiting, being an 18th century profession for those willing to put up with the stipulations. As Campbell cites from an advertisement referenced in Sir William Gell's A Tour in the Lakes made in 1797, quote, "The hermit is never to leave the place or hold conversation with anyone for 7 years, during which he is neither to wash himself or cleanse himself in any way whatever, but is to let his hair and nails on both hands and feet grow as long as nature will permit them," unquote. What is it with Europeans and their aversion to bathing? What is up with that? It stinks. If you ask me, it really stinks. Onward. Oh, okay, I'm going through some pictures here. Here we go. Others asked that their hermits not wear shoes, or even to entertain party guests with personalized poetry or the serving of wine. It might seem like a whimsical garden feature, but in fact it was all about that most celebrated of Georgian England emotions, melancholy. Introspection and somberness of spirit were prized among the elite, and the roles they asked their hermits to play embodied this. A 1784 guide to the Hawkstone estate in Shropshire, belonging to Sir Richard Hill, describes its resident hermit, quote, "You pull a bell and gain admittance. The hermit is generally in a sitting posture, with a table before him, on which is a skull, the emblem of mortality, an hourglass, a book, and a pair of spectacles. The venerable Barefooted father, whose name is Francis, if awake, always rises up to the approach of strangers. He seems about 90 years of age, yet has all his sense to admiration. He is tolerably conversant and far from being unpolite." Unquote. At other hours, the Hawkstone Hermit was replaced with a mannequin, or perhaps, Campbell speculates, an automaton. What? So if the hermit's asleep, they would put a fucking mannequin or a moving mannequin of him up? Let the guy sleep. What the fuck is up with... I guess you really have to account for how bored these people were. Let's continue. Some estate owners who couldn't afford or did not want a real live hermit sometimes set up the hermitage as if its resident had just left. Others used the hermitages themselves. The ornamental hermit vanished at the end of the 18th century. In The Hermit in the Garden, Campbell chronicles the remains in a catalog of hermitages, listing whether they are destroyed, extant, or never built at all. However, the humble hermit may not have left us entirely. As Campbell argues, the garden hermit evolved from the antiquarian druid and eventually declined into the garden gnome. That's it for that article. I'm going to have another sip of liquid, and we will continue with the next article I found at a website, thehermitary.com. Did you know this existed? Thehermitary.com. Let me take a sip and I'll be right back. Okay, here we go. Hermitary.com. Resources and reflections on hermits and solitude. I might explore this website some more at a later date. This sounds right up my alley. This article falls under House of Lore, is titled Ornamental Hermits of Eccentric Modern England. Charles, no author is written here, unless they're at the bottom. No, just bibliographical references. Onward. Charles P. Weaver suggests in his book Hermits in English Literature that the demise of eremitism in England after King Henry VIII's suppression of monasteries, monks, nuns, and hermits. Damn, he suppressed hermits? Man, that guy's an asshole. Left a void in English culture and imagination after so many centuries of cultivating the imagery and inspiration of the hermit. After the turmoil of religious and civil warfare in the 17th century England, a maudlin literature arose by the 18th century that featured hermits and other eccentric characters, a class of fiction, drama, and poetry that fell significantly short of literary seriousness. This literary episode is little pursued and largely ignored today. Not until the 19th century Romantic poets, led by Wordsworth, was the image of the hermit and the solitary revived with a sense of genuine identification and value, presented in context of nature, emotion, and antiquarianism. But an unusual, if short-lived and not extensive fad arose in 18th century England. Men of eccentric bent and material substance took up the practice of installing on the grounds of their estates an ornamental hermit. An ornamental hermit was not a real hermit, as the name suggests. An ornamental hermit was a man employed by the estate owner to reside in a contrived hermitage for a period of time and make scheduled appearances on the grounds to the pleasure of the employer and to be seen and marveled at by the guests. In fact, there were not... I just want to interject here. I would do this. I would be a hermit for hire. I still would do this now. Maybe just for a year. I think a year seems fair enough. I'm still rather young. Maybe I'm not old enough to be considered, to fit the character type for a lawn hermit. But I believe, I don't just believe, I know, I have the disposition to be a lawn hermit. If there are any wealthy eccentrics who are not creeps, who would be willing to, provide me room, board, and a lot of money, I would gladly take the job of lawn hermit. Okay, let's keep reading. Where were we? In fact, there were not many ornamental hermits, but they were brought especially to attention in the 20th century. British writer, poet, and essayist Edith Sitwell, author of the intriguing 1933 book English Eccentricities. Sitwell was not a bit less eccentric than the many characters she describes in her panoply of strange people spanning several centuries of modern English. Wow. History. I just want to point out this typo. Englanish. I had never seen that word before. I said English history, but it's Englanish. Englanish. New word, new idea, new thing learned. See, that's part of what this show is about, is learning new stuff. Because learning is fun. It makes life more savory and it makes you a more interesting person. In Chapter 2, Ancients and Ornamental Hermits, Sitwell describes in the first part of the chapter men of reputed great age in 17th to 19th century England. In the second part of the chapter, Sitwell describes ornamental hermits. Chapter 6 relates the life and times of what a name, Captain Philip Thickness. His name is Captain Philip Thickness. Thicknesse. Thickness. Captain Philip Thickness, who became an ornamental hermit late in life and wrote, "The duplicity of mankind and satiety of enjoyments all tend to show that even the splendid scenes which surround the palaces of wealth and greatness are never thought complete unless marked by some shady care and the abode of an imaginary anchorite. And I've never seen that word before. Anchorite. Anchorite. Is that somewhat similar to, oh Christ, what's the word for a person who doesn't like people? A misanthrope? Maybe not. Maybe somewhere similar. Maybe halfway. Porque no los dos? Onward. This passage succinctly describes the fashion. Writing when he was employed as an ornamental hermit, Thickness can conclude, "I have obtained that which every man aims but few acquire, solitude and retirement." Alas, this was only temporary employment for the rambunctious Captain Thickness for St. Catherine's Hermitage near Bath, which I've been to. Beautiful town, Roman town in England. Where he resided was put up for sale, ending his short-lived career. Thickness went on to live a life of exaggerated eccentricities, not at all becoming of a real hermit, but apparently not out of character for an ornamental one. Sitwell's Ornamental Hermits. Sitwell derives her information about ornamental hermits from an obscure self-published 1866 book by John Timms entitled English Eccentrics and Eccentricities. The accounts of 9 ornamental hermits, not including Philip Thickness, who wrote memoirs, oh my God, I gotta read these, is derived from Tim's gleaning of newspaper and serial publications of the time, even more obscure than his book. Similar accounts of ornamental hermits are included in the more recent 2002 book, Pelican in the Wilderness by Isabel Colgate. Oh, I love the name Isabel. It's so beautiful. So beautiful. However, Colgate cites different secondary sources and not Tim's, as Colgate's quotations and summaries of ornamental hermits are essentially the same as Sitwell's, but not to mention of Sitwell, there is nothing added to the latter's account. Sitwell's second chapter makes its smooth transition from ancients to ornamental hermits due to the fact that ornamental hermits were expected to project a particular physical appearance, the most obvious being age. Quote, certain noblemen and country squires were advertising the ornamental hermits. Nothing, it was felt, could give such delight to the eye as the spectacle of an aged person with a very long grey beard and a goatish, rough robe, doddering about amongst the discomforts and pleasures of nature. Unquote. Brief or detailed descriptions of 8 ornamental hermits follow. Sitwell makes the tacit and unwritten distinctions between real and ornamental in identifying a higher spiritual or psychological motive to the real and historical hermit versus the ornamental or artificial hermits she described. Some are properly recluses and not hermits. In the end, the characters she described are properly eccentrics. Like yours truly. Wink. Number 1. The most famous employer of the ornamental hermit was Charles Hamilton. Here is an account as quoted by Timms. The Honorable Charles Hamilton, whose estate was at Payne's Hall. Ouch. Oh my God, I'm funny. The Honorable Charles Hamilton, whose estate was at Payne's Hall, ouch, near Cobham, Surrey, and who lived in the reign of King George II, was one of those admirers of singularity and silence, and, having advertised for a hermit, he built a retreat for this ornamental but retiring person on a steep mound on his estate. Unquote. The hermitage was neither well designed or constructed. The general terms of the contract were spelled out in advertisement. In the advertisement, the hermit must, quote, continue on the hermitage 7 years, where he shall be provided with a Bible, optical glasses, a mat for his feet, a hassock for his pillow, an hourglass for timepiece, water for his beverage, and food from the house. He must wear a camlet robe, and never under any circumstances must he cut his hair, beard, or nails, stray beyond the limits of Mr. Hamilton's grounds, or exchange one word with the servant. Unquote. Hamilton's advertisement concludes with the condition that if the man so employed could last 7 years, he would receive the sum of £700, otherwise not a penny. What a harsh and shitty deal that was. The first ornamental hermit lasted a full 3 weeks. Colgate's source adds that he was last spotted at the local pub. Nothing more is known of Hamilton's luck or successors to this first hermit. 2. John Timms himself advertised for an ornamental hermit. Timms of Preston, Lancashire, I think that's how it's said, of Preston, Lancashire, offered a remuneration of £50 a year for life or 7 years of service if the applicant could meet certain conditions. The hermit would have to, as the advertisement stated, live for 7 years underground without cutting his hair, beard, toenails, or fingernails. The underground quarters were described by Timms as very commodious, including a cold bath, a chamber organ, ooh, fancy, as many books as the hermit wished, and provisions from Timms' own table. Sitwell notes that the ornamental hermit resided for 4 years, sight unseen. quote, "It is a little difficult to guess what pleasure his employer can have gotten out of the matter," concludes Sitwell. 3. In the January 11th, 1810 edition of the Courier appeared an advertisement by a potential ornamental hermit seeking employment, quote, "A young man who wishes to retire." Oh, a young man. Hey. A young man who wishes to retire from the world and live as a hermit in some convenient spot in England is willing to engage with any nobleman or gentleman who may be desirous of having one, any letter addressed to S. Lawrence, post paid, to be left at Mr. Otto's No. 6 Coleman Lane, Plymouth, mentioning what gratuity will be given, and all other particulars will be duly attended. Apparently, a gratuity or salary was understood to be a part of an ornamental hermit's arrangement. Whether the applicant received a response is not known. Number 4. A section of the April 1830 edition of Blackwood's magazine called Noctes Ambrosianae included a note by Christopher North about the editor of a certain magazine. The editor reads the note had been for 14 years hermit to Lord Hill's father, and sat in a cave in that worthy baronet's grounds with an hourglass in his hand and a beard belonging to an old goat from sunrise to sunset, with orders to accept no half-crowns from visitors, but to behave like the Giordano Bruno, unquote. Presumably, Lord North's father, as hermit, would not, however, have spoken like Bruno, or spoken at all, but the ornamental hermit had been mentioned in an earlier source. In an 1810 issue of Notes and Queries, a correspondent refers to Lord Hill's father as Richard Hill of Hawkstone, Shropshire. The correspondence relates that on a visit to the Hill property, he had been shown the hermitage there, inhabited by a stuffed figure dressed in the proper professional robe of an ornamental hermit, with the whole scene being illuminated by the dimmest of lights. Elizabeth Colgate adds to this anecdote that Hill had secured the services of a certain Father Francis. Was Father Francis the editor referred to in the notice 20 years later? About Father Francis, Colgate notes from her source, "He was venerable and bearded, and described as 90 in successive editions of the guidebooks over the years, and when death caught up with him in the end, no subsequent application could match him. At one time his place was taken by an automaton, which apparently both moved and spoke. Sir Richard Colt's horror of Stourhead, on one of the tours on the countryside which he undertook at the time of the Napoleonic Wars, when travel abroad was difficult, was critical. The face is natural enough, the figure stiff and not well managed. The effect would be infinitely better if the door was placed at an angle on the wall and not opposite you. The passenger would then come up to Saint Francis by surprise, whereas the ringing of the bell and the door onto the building, quite dark within, renders the effect less natural," unquote. Such was the eccentric English interest in ornamental hermits, even in ornamental hermits. And then this article goes on to some other things, but I want to conclude this by going back to another part of the wiki that I didn't find elsewhere because I didn't search for it. History. Let's see here. Oh no. That's not what I was thinking of. What I was thinking of is earlier in the episode, I was reading somewhere that it was mentioned that some of these ornamental hermits would be consulted for advice. And this happened. This actually happened. Some person, I cannot remember their name. King Charles. Oh, yeah. Francis of Paola. That might be the same Francis, Father Francis, early 15th century Cave of Fathers estate, served as a confidant and advisor to King Charles III. So, yeah, it was not unheard of that an ornamental hermit would be a personal advisor and just sort of gossip and, trauma dump object for aristocrats. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm not feeling super hot. I'm feeling a bit lightheaded now, so I think that will be the end of this episode. Kind of petered out here, but, such is c'est la vie. Such is the life of a lawn hermit. There you go. You learned about something new today. Lawn hermits, ornamental hermits, perhaps the origin of garden gnomes. Thanks for tuning in. You rock. And if you want to catch this week's bonus episode and the other 100 bonus episodes, literal 100, become a patron at patreon.com/ThatThingWithJames. And thank you again to my current patrons and past patrons. I appreciate it. All right. Hopefully I'll catch you next time. Bye.